This is a robbery! Everybody down! Go ahead up!
In the 1990s, Seattle, Washington was plagued by hundreds of bank robberies. Most of the thieves were caught, but one continued to elude the FBI. Wearing a disguise, he stole millions, threatening to kill anyone who got in his way. With no leads and little evidence, agents feared the only way to stop him was to catch him in the act.
Every bank teller's worst fear is to stare down the barrel of a robber's gun. Banks use a variety of devices to discourage would-be robbers. Security cameras, silent alarms, and exploding die packs. But when an elusive bank robber targeted Seattle's banks, none of these precautions were effective. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. It would take cunning, precision, and patience to capture a master of disguise the FBI knew only as Hollywood.
Seattle, Washington, 1992. The computer revolution was growing. Technology entrepreneurs were pumping billions into the city's economy. To accommodate the newfound wealth, banks opened branches all over Seattle. But neighborhood convenience also meant more opportunity for theft. On the afternoon of June 25th, at Seafirst Bank's Madison branch, two masked gunmen threatened to shoot anyone who did not comply with their demands.
Everybody move! We're gonna shoot!
One trained his gun on the frightened customers, while the other forced a teller to empty her cash drawer.
Stay down!
After the bag was filled, they demanded car keys from one of the customers who they had watched pull up. They warned the tellers not to hit an alarm or they would return and kill someone. The two sped away with nearly $20,000. Since the bank's deposits were insured by the federal government, the FBI was called in to assist the Seattle police.
One in front and one in the back.
Because no alarm had been tripped, the bank's security cameras were not activated. Investigators had no photos of the suspects. Customers and bank employees described the gunman as being of medium height and build. One employee heard the man holding the cash call to his partner using the name Mark.
The guy came to that door.
The robbers had worn gloves, so no fingerprints could be obtained. Investigators attempted to lift shoe prints from the desk where one of them had stood. Partial treads were recovered, which investigators believed were made by sneakers. Agents recorded the license plate number of the customer's stolen car, a Cadillac sedan. Hours later, the stolen Cadillac was discovered abandoned in a neighborhood close to the bank. Forensic technicians would pore over the vehicle's interior, but find no fingerprints, hairs, or fibers foreign to the car. 7 weeks passed with no leads. Then, on Friday, August 14th,
This is a robbery! Everybody
the same
down!
bank was
Down!
robbed again.
Jump!
Though the thief struck alone wearing a new disguise, one of the tellers believed it was the same man. He appeared to be wearing theatrical makeup.
We didn't trip off any alarms, did we? fill that up.
His take was more than $8,000, and it was just the beginning. Over the next 3 months, the same man hit 4 more Seattle area banks. Each time, a solo gunman wearing theater makeup, a hat, and dark sunglasses was responsible. He brandished a Glock 9mm pistol and threatened to kill anyone who tried to stop him. On his 6th robbery, the thief had gotten away with $252,000, and investigators still had no leads and no name. Special Agent Sean Johnson of the FBI's Seattle field office began tracking this master of disguise, who had come to be known as Hollywood.
It's much easier to coin a name for somebody than to call him tall white male in a blue hat. So with this person in particular, he wore, once again, this elaborate facial disguise, makeup. So somewhere along the line, somebody started calling him Hollywood because of that, and that name stuck with him.
Hollywood had gone silent since he'd robbed Seafirst Bank's Hawthorne branch in northeast Seattle. His take from that location exceeded $250,000. To date, Hollywood had grabbed over $320,000 from Seattle area banks. Authorities had recovered none of the stolen cash, and they still had no clues to his identity. As the months passed, investigators wondered if he had quit or moved on to another city. Then, on November 24th, 1993, just over a year since his last heist, Hollywood struck again. Brandishing his trademark Glock pistol, Hollywood herded the customers together.
Don't move. Money on the counter.
He returned to Seafirst Bank's Hawthorne branch, the bank he had previously hit for more than $250,000. He asked for the reserve cash. Unsatisfied with the cash drawer take, he ordered a teller to let him into the vault in a back room. Hollywood emerged with nearly $100,000. Again, he threatened to kill anyone who hit an alarm. No one disobeyed his orders.
When Hollywood came into the banks, he was very much in control. He was polite to a degree, but it didn't make people comfortable. They were very afraid that he would use the weapon. He brandished it. It actually pointed at a number of people during the course of the robberies. So we knew that he was not afraid to show the weapon and also to possibly use that weapon against somebody who didn't obey what he told them to do.
Security strategies in Seattle banks at this time included using marked bills to trace stolen money. Another tactic was dye packs. Hidden inside a stack of bills, the packs contain red dye and an electronic charge.
All right, it's going to work for you. Just underneath one sack.
The pack detonates and stains a thief when he crosses sensors at the bank's exit.
Safe is tied in.
Silent alarms made it possible for tellers to call the police without alerting the robbers.
Wait till they get out.
Once you press that button,
Video cameras monitored every corner of the bank.
They'll take a picture about every 7 seconds.
So far, Hollywood had somehow managed to defeat all these measures.
You need to give us a call.
July 13th, 1994. Hollywood attacked his 10th bank in 2 years. He used a stun gun to threaten bank employees. The teller risked her life pushing a silent alarm.
754 North Independence, Westlake Bank and Trust, robbery in progress.
Hollywood looted the cash drawer, unaware that patrol units were racing to the scene.
Shut up and don't touch anybody!
Go, everybody, don't touch anyone. Go. All right, good.
He fled with nearly $112,000. A witness outside the bank saw him get into a dark blue Dodge Caravan. A second person drove it. The witness was unable to see the vehicle's license tag. After police secured the scene, another bank employee arrived for work.
Oh, very good, thank you. Just tell me what you saw.
He told police about an incident on the previous day. The employee noticed a man taking notes in front of the bank, standing next to a blue Dodge Caravan. The witness said he was too far away to get a good look at his face.
I appreciate you coming forward, and if you can think of any other details.
To Agent Johnson, it appeared that Hollywood studied the locations before striking.
He would scout out the banks days before, get a feel for the layout, who came, who went from the bank at given times.
Hollywood's planning was paying off. He had gotten away with over $660,000. He struck most often on Wednesdays or Thursdays. The next time he appeared was 6 months later. As he filled his bag, the teller overheard a radio call from beneath his coat urging him to exit. When he passed the bank's sensors, a dye pack exploded. For the first time, he had failed in a robbery attempt. A witness outside the bank took down the license plate number of the getaway car. Special Agent Johnson was able to trace the vehicle.
We ran the license plates from the cars, and they came back to a couple who lived in Tacoma, Washington, south of Seattle. So I went and talked to the couple to find out how their car had been sold.
They had advertised the car in a local paper. The buyer paid $1,200 in cash without test driving it. The couple described the buyer as a white male in his late 30s or early 40s, of medium height and weight. Based on their description, a sketch artist created a likeness of the suspect. The FBI now had their first glimpse of what Hollywood might look like. By the spring of 1995, a masked Seattle gunman had robbed 12 banks of nearly $1 million and left behind few clues. Investigators dubbed him Hollywood for his use of disguises and theatrical makeup. The only lead that agents had was a sketch of what they believed was the face behind the mask. Special Agent Sean Johnson looked for a pattern. If he could figure out similarities among the banks Hollywood robbed, perhaps he could predict when and where he would strike next.
I went back and visited all the banks that Hollywood had hit since June of '92. What I was looking for was some commonality. How many doors were in the banks? What was the layout of the lobby? Where was the vault located? Was it downstairs, upstairs, on the main floor? What was the size of the parking lot? Was it adjacent to the bank? Was it across the street? What kind of street was this bank located on?
Johnson discovered that most of the banks were in commercial districts where area businesses made their deposits. The banks also bordered residential areas. This enabled Hollywood to blend into the surrounding neighborhood without arousing suspicion.
He liked 3 areas of the city primarily, the northeast part of town, Madison Park, which was just outside of downtown, and West Seattle. So once again, looking at the types of banks he hit, the branches themselves, and areas of the city, we came up with a pattern of likely targets.
In March of 1995, 3 years after Hollywood's initial heist, the Puget Sound Violent Crimes Task Force was formed. Staffed with investigators from 5 different agencies, they had one goal in mind: to take Hollywood off the streets. Hollywood struck most often around noon, and almost always on the last 3 days of the work week. 4 of his past 5 robberies occurred in late January or early February. Agents calculated that Hollywood appeared to be going through about $20,000 a month. Detective Mike McGann joined the task force in June of 1995. McGann knew the streets and had many bank robbery collars to his credit.
It was my belief that at least 95% of the people that I arrested were narcotics users. The other 5% I believed to be gamblers, thrill seekers, professionals, or people that were working out of sheer desperation. Where I'd classify Hollywood was that he was a well-trained, well-disciplined professional.
McGann pored over the security camera photos of Hollywood. He noted the weapons he brandished were a 9mm Glock and a stun gun. At the time, these arms were being considered as weapons of choice among law enforcement. The detective also noticed that Hollywood indexed his trigger finger on the side of the 9mm, a technique taught to police officers. Many of the robberies occurred in the late morning, between 11 a.m. and noon, precisely the time when a shift change for the Seattle police occurred. The evidence pointed to a frightening possibility. Hollywood might be a cop.
And the reason I thought he was a police officer is he knew so much about how we operated, that he was probably watching us or listening to us. He was disciplined. He was in and out of the banks quickly. He moved swiftly. He just knew a lot about the policy procedures of the bank. He knew that the areas that he was hitting in were primarily residential areas that don't have much police presence in them.
Then something else caught his eye. He noticed that Hollywood was wearing a radio on his belt. If Hollywood was communicating with a walkie, perhaps police could intercept the transmission. The detective contacted an electronics expert known as the Glitch. With his help, McGann hoped to gain an advantage.
Rectangle,
Right there?
gray, brown, right.
I had sat down with this person and showed him the surveillance photographs of Hollywood and the two-way radio he had, and he was able to determine the frequency most common to those radios that he would work off, and it was 2 different frequencies.
The Glitch offered to rig up a scanner in McGann's unmarked car.
329. How did you come up with this?
By eavesdropping on Hollywood, investigators hoped they could pinpoint his whereabouts and catch him in the act. The idea didn't work. Special Agent Johnson was stationed outside a bank in northeast Seattle, monitoring the radio, when Hollywood and an accomplice struck elsewhere.
It's about 11:30. I was going to break off about 12 o'clock, and all of a sudden I heard the Seattle Police radio saying we've had a bank robbery, First Interstate Bank, and that was about 2 miles from my location. I heard the physical description. I knew at that point it was Hollywood, and he had come back on one of those 3 days I predicted a year before, and we just missed him.
A bystander outside the bank got the license number. Like his first robbery, the getaway car was found in a neighborhood near the bank. The FBI traced the car back to its owner, who said he had sold it to a man for cash a few weeks earlier.
I had the owner come up and look at the vehicle, and I said, "Is there anything different about this car from when he sold it. And he says, sure.
Overall condition of your engine compartment here, is anything...
The owner noticed the car had a new battery.
Different here? You notice any difference?
I was about to say.
Agents found that the car had been wiped down inside and out. The owner also noticed that 2 of the tires had been replaced with newer ones.
So I went to trace the tires, found out they'd been bought in Tacoma, Washington. The battery was bought at a Sears store in Tacoma about 2 days after the car was purchased. So I knew at that point that these people, whether it was Hollywood and or his partners, were in the area at least 2 months before the robberies.
Working with a sketch artist, the owner described the buyer. Investigators now had 2 composite sketches, but they were still no closer to catching Hollywood. Supervisory Special Agent Ellen Glasser was brought in to head the task force. She made the decision to go on the offensive.
It's one thing to put pen to paper and to put your thought processes at work and try to solve a case. It's another when you take a proactive posture in an investigation, knowing that you might get into a confrontation with somebody like Hollywood.
The supervisor realized that a more aggressive stance would place her agents in greater peril. Hollywood had repeatedly threatened to kill anyone who tried to stop him.
We knew he had a propensity for violence and figured that if he was going to these elaborate means to disguise himself to plan the robberies, that he probably would not necessarily give up easily as most others did. And we were concerned about safety of law enforcement and safety of customers and employees of the banks.
Okay, he's taking a lot of care.
More personnel were assigned to specific areas of the city, targeting the banks hit most often by Hollywood.
So he came up with a game plan saying, okay, we're going to be out on the streets on Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays between these periods of time, knowing full well that greed would probably take the better part of Hollywood and he would come back and rob another bank, even with the amount of money he'd already taken.
On May 22, 1996, despite the increased presence of law enforcement, Hollywood hit the First Interstate Bank in the affluent suburb of Madison Park. It was his 14th known robbery. To generate leads, agents reached out to the community.
We increased the reward to $50,000 that we were offering in the community for tips. We didn't want to have the media work against us. Now, we didn't want to glamorize Hollywood and cause copycat bank robbers to go out and rob banks. But we also felt that we needed the public.
Agents saturated Madison Park with hundreds of wanted flyers. Perhaps heightened public awareness could also help eliminate that neighborhood as a potential target. Then, law enforcement could increase manpower in the remaining neighborhoods. The campaign yielded nothing. Hollywood had not surfaced in months. They consulted a police profiler to learn how Hollywood might react if and when he was cornered.
Could be someone who is familiar or someone who was taken out of.
Based on his broad knowledge of violent criminal behavior, the profiler told them that Hollywood would not go quietly.
And it was very important for us to hear him say, this guy is going to resist arrest. This guy will not want to go into custody. This guy will fight you. This guy is dangerous.
Authorities could only guess when and where Hollywood would strike next, and if his gun would remain silent. For almost 4 years, Hollywood had threatened to shoot anyone who got in his way. Agents were convinced that if he was challenged, the masked gunman would shoot to kill. By 1996, a masked gunman known only as Hollywood had robbed 14 Seattle banks.
Trip off any alarms.
He threatened to kill dozens of people for his take of $1.2 million over 4 years. Though Hollywood had not fired his weapon, agents believed that if confronted, he would kill. Supervisory Special Agent Ellen Glasser showed the task force a videotape of what could happen if they were not prepared.
We have been using for training in the FBI a video of the tragic firefight that took place in 1986 in Miami, where we lost 2 of our agents and several other agents were wounded. What they were doing that day is they were on a surveillance for 2 dangerous bank robbery suspects. So there were some obvious parallels to what we were doing.
On April 11th, 1986, the FBI confronted 2 armed bank robbers in Miami. A shootout erupted. The gunmen advanced while the agents were reloading their revolvers, killing 2 of them and seriously wounding 5 others.
That Miami shootout was a reminder of how high the stakes were. We can't always be 100% prepared, but we should be thinking, have a plan.
All right, come on. Set. Moving.
To avoid repeating the tragedy that occurred in Miami, Glasser developed more uniform procedures between the various agencies. The Seattle SWAT team trained alongside Special Agent Johnson.
We did extensive training with them, firearms training, felony car stops, how to take people out of cars, different situations and how we'd respond to a bank robbery that Hollywood had committed. And that was all done under Ellen Glasser's supervision. And her #1 concern, of course, was the safety of all the people involved.
Yeah. FBI, get out, get out, get out!
Detective McGann knew they needed to make sure all personnel were on the same page.
It also gave us a chance to test our communications because the FBI doesn't work off police communications, they had their own. So what we had to do is get everybody on board on the same radio frequency.
To prevent the danger of friendly fire, all personnel were required to wear clothing with emblazoned logos.
It looked really good otherwise, but you had your head out just a little too long.
As Thanksgiving approached, Glasser believed they were as prepared as they could be.
360 is all around. It's not just...
Well, that Wednesday, that day before Thanksgiving in 1996, it started out just like any other day. I went to work thinking I was going to catch up on some of my overdue paperwork, thinking that I was looking forward to the holiday the next day, having a day off, the banks would be closed, and thinking that people needed a rest because they had been working so hard.
Agent Glasser, Detective McGann, and Detective Pete Erickson were the last ones in the office when an alert tone came over the radio at 5:41.
And upon hearing that, I knew that it was Hollywood that had hit. And I'm looking around the office thinking, well, Pete's here. And I looked at him and said, do you want to go? He goes, oh yeah, let's go. And Ellen saw me run down the hall and she's yelling, Mike, what's going on? I said, Hollywood hit, do you want to go? She goes, yes. So she grabbed her coat and we all left the task force office. And my car was parked right outside the front door. We ran down and turned on the lights and the siren and put the light on the roof, and away we went.
Multiple suspects had robbed a bank in Lake City, the Seattle suburb just minutes from task force headquarters.
As soon as we got into Mike's car, I could hear the Seattle police radio traffic. And I remember hearing the references to the makeup. And it was really those references to the pancake makeup that made it resonate in my head that this was it. This was it.
They got another call. A witness had seen a vehicle exit the bank's parking lot in an erratic manner. A vehicle matching the description had been spotted. The police believed they had found the getaway car. It turned out to be a false alarm. The engine was cold. 20 minutes had passed since the first call. McGann was sure that Hollywood had transferred to a different vehicle by now.
He would need a place to change. He would need a place to take that makeup off, that wig off, to change his clothing, to put the weapons, you know, so put the weapons away, or the money. The getaway car there would most likely be a van.
Detective McGann continued to cruise the side streets in the residential area near the bank. From past robberies, McGann and Agent Glasser knew this was where he would most likely change vehicles.
Some units were responding to one location, and Mike was saying, that's not him, that's not him. He'd patrolled in these streets. He'd grown up in Seattle. He knew every nook and cranny of the town in that area.
After several minutes of crisscrossing the main roads, they pulled up behind a white van.
And there was condensation on the insides of the windows. I mean, heavy condensation where the beads of water were dripping down on the insides of the van. But there were flashlights moving about the van, real quick light, and it had dark windows, tinted windows on it.
McGann had a strong suspicion it was Hollywood. They called in to check the plates. The driver of the van ignored the emergency lights and pulled away.
Dispatch. Vehicle 1.
The investigators had no way of knowing how many persons were in the van, or if they had any weapons. If it was Hollywood, they knew at the very least he would be carrying a 9mm Glock.
By this time, I knew he knew we were behind him. He could see me. He just knew we were there. And he drove northbound and slowly came to a stop.
They prepared to approach the idling van.
Good!
When I got out, all I saw was this person holding the rifle at port arms and stepped out from the side and took aim at me with that rifle. And right then I feared that I was going to be shot and killed.
The rifle jammed. McGann fired into the rear of the van. The chase had turned into a firefight.
Get in.
On the night before Thanksgiving 1996, 3 investigators had just fired at a fleeing van after its driver had attempted to shoot them with a rifle. They believe the van held a man known only as Hollywood, an elusive bank robber. Special Agent Sean Johnson responded to the call for backup.
My pager went off. I looked at it and knew immediately there had been a bank robbery. I called the office and was told that Hollywood, based on the description that they had gotten, Hollywood had just robbed a bank, Seafirst Bank, Lake City branch in the north part of town.
Still several miles away, Johnson raced to the location. As the van came to another stop, backup arrived. The gunman ducked back into the van and the chase resumed. Special Agent Glasser felt it was a miracle the three of them had survived unharmed.
I think that's partially by the grace of God, because these rounds were found in the windshield of the car that was behind us, so they went right over us.
They continued to pursue the unidentified gunman through the residential neighborhood. The agent updated their new position for approaching units. They followed the van until it disappeared around a turn. Fearful he might be driving into an ambush, McGann got out and continued the pursuit on foot. Detective McGann told a canine officer to cover the right side while he moved up on the left.
And I'm trying to think, am I doing everything right? I'm alive, there's no bullet holes in me, my coworkers are alive, plenty of help is behind us. And I knew plenty of help was in front of us, coming at us.
Up ahead, they could see the lights from an approaching Seattle police cruiser. It intercepted the van, forcing it off the road. The van had come to rest in the front yard of a house. Investigators still had no idea how many were in the vehicle.
Right. Out of the van! Keep your hands where we can see them. Right. Doors are open.
The side doors burst open, but no one came out.
Cover me. Out of the van! Keep your hands out where we can see them. Keep your hands out.
2 men, badly wounded, were pulled from the van. One suspect had taken 3 rounds. The bullets had penetrated his left shoulder, thigh, and stomach. The other had been hit in his right shoulder.
When I looked down at him and said, "What's your name?" And he said, "Steve." I said, "Steve what?" And he said, "Steve Myers." And I said, "Are you Hollywood?" And he says, "No."
The other suspect was taller and heavier than the gunman from the security camera photos. Police believed he was not Hollywood either. The detective turned his attention to the van, but no one else was inside.
And I'm thinking, where's the third suspect? You're saying the suspect got out. Are you positive? And they're saying, yes, he got out when he saw us. He took off. So I'm thinking, oh my God.
Investigators quickly organized a search, both on the ground and in the air. A third suspect, probably Hollywood, was on the run. Police believed he was armed. They did not know how far he could get if he was wounded. As the search continued, a forensics team processed the van.
And in the back of the van, there was a guitar case that had been converted into a gun-carrying case, and a blue nylon bag that had money in it. And it was a big bag of money.
The robbers had left behind more than $1 million. They also found pieces of a latex mask, most likely belonging to Hollywood. Scattered around the blood-soaked interior, investigators found an assault rifle, a semi-automatic shotgun, 2 pistols, and several boxes of ammunition. Hollywood's Glock 9mm pistol was nowhere to be found.
Could have taken hostage in a house, yeah. That did cross my mind, that, you know, maybe he ran into a house and was holding a family hostage and would hold them until, you know, the early hours of the morning, or until traffic died out, or he could be watching us. He could be one of us.
Wherever he was and whoever he was, Hollywood had eluded the FBI once more. After 4 years of pursuit, the masked bank robber known as Hollywood had eluded capture again following his 15th known bank robbery. But 2 of his accomplices had been taken into custody. One was identified as Mark Biggins. Biggins had been Hollywood's accomplice in 3 of the robberies, including their first. He wore the Reagan mask. The other accomplice was Steve Myers, the man who drove Hollywood's getaway cars. Special Agent Johnson pressed Myers for Hollywood's real name.
You need to tell me who this person is, where he is. And he finally said, okay, I'll tell you. The person you're looking for is Scott Scurlock.
Scott Scurlock wasn't a police officer. He was a local actor. Agents moved in on his 20-acre ranch in Olympia, Washington, an hour south of Seattle.
Yeah, search warrant. Clear left.
But no one was there.
Clear.
Investigators found a semi-automatic 9mm Glock.
Okay. Screwed up. Number 9. All right. Check it out.
Agents recovered $23,000 in cash. The searchers also found a dozen pairs of canvas athletic shoes, the same kind that Hollywood was reported to have worn in several robberies.
Check over here.
Behind the house, agents approached a barn.
All right, clear left. Clear.
Inside, they found tools, building materials, and equipment. On the dusty floor, one of the agents noticed some footprints that led to a trap door. It opened into an underground chamber.
See a light switch anywhere? Right here.
Agents had no way of knowing if Hollywood was hiding there with a gun. Scurlock wasn't there. But behind a curtain, they discovered a second room.
Lighting switch here.
It was a complete makeup studio. The agents also found a photograph of Scurlock without makeup.
Is this who we've been looking for? It's gotta be. Is this Hollywood?
That's the man. It's gotta be him.
Behind the barn, Special Agent Sean Johnson and his team came across a large treehouse.
It sat about 60 feet up into the trees. It was built on 7 cedar trees. It consisted of 3 stories. It had numerous ramps that extended out from the treehouse. It was something to behold.
Agents searched the treehouse. They found no sign of Scurlock. Police were still patrolling the neighborhood where the shootout had occurred the night before. Searchers had combed the area, but found no trace of the fugitive. Then a report came in that a man had spotted someone hiding in a camper behind his mother's house.
Come out of the trailer.
Police responded and approached the camper.
Sir, police officer, come out of the trailer.
They identified themselves, but received no response. An officer emptied a can of pepper spray into the window.
Police, come out of the trailer.
A shot rang out.
Chief, get some backup.
Police set up a perimeter around the camper and called in reinforcements. Agent Johnson had just returned from searching Scurlock's property.
Within minutes of arriving at the office, having not even unloaded the evidence, I heard on the Seattle police radio shots had been exchanged at a location about 2 blocks away from the previous night's events. So without even beginning to unload the evidence, I took off again, heading northbound out of town, lights and sirens to this location.
Every available unit converged on the site. Supervisory Special Agent Glasser had gone home after the shootout.
By that point in time, I had decided not to cook a turkey on Thanksgiving. I had changed the reservations for where we were going to eat Thanksgiving to a later time so that we could all be together as a family. And we were almost out the door when we got a call from the office that Hollywood was barricaded in a trailer.
No other shots had been fired since that first exchange.
Come on, Scott, come out. Pick it up.
Scurlock's girlfriend was brought to the scene. If it was the fugitive, perhaps she could persuade him to give himself up.
Come on, Scott, come out.
There was no response. Nobody knew for sure who was in the camper. Out of options, the SWAT team was called to action. Hoping to flush out the suspect, they fired 2 rounds of tear gas into his refuge. They heard nothing. SWAT members entered cautiously.
And the initial radio communication from the SWAT team said there's lots of blood, but we see no body. And my first reaction to that was, is this guy a ghost or what? How can there be no body? And then just seconds later they say, we've got a body.
Through the smoke, a white male could be seen lying lifeless on the floor. A gun near his head. Scurlock's photograph was compared to the body. It matched. The coroner later determined that his death had been self-inflicted. Mark Biggins recovered from his wounds. He and Steve Myers pled guilty to bank robbery, assault on a federal officer, and firearms violations. They were sentenced to 21 years in a federal prison. Scott Scurlock had hidden behind a mask for 4.5 years. But when the FBI struck back, the man they called Hollywood found there was no place left to hide. In the Pacific Northwest, tragedy would forever bind 3 women who would never meet. One disappeared just months before her wedding. Another vanished, leaving 2 children behind. A third survived her night of terror and spoke for the others she never knew. The hunt for a serial killer led FBI agents cross-country as they followed his deadly trail.
disappearance of young women triggered a search that spanned the Pacific Northwest. Even a massive media campaign failed to locate the drifter who first charmed, then killed them. As investigators followed his trail, he always stayed one step ahead. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. In a case that landed on the FBI's 10 most wanted list, agents hoped that the one victim the killer spared would help put him behind bars.
March 28th, 1987. LaRon Crouston left a party in the suburbs of Tacoma, Washington at 4 in the morning. He was looking forward to a day of fishing.
Come with me.
LaRon's fiancée, 22-year-old Robin Smith, decided to stay. She was having a good time. Robin assured LaRon she'd be fine.
I love you.
I love you too.
She would just get a ride home from someone she'd met at the party. After fishing all day Saturday, LaRon fell asleep, exhausted. He didn't wake up until early Sunday afternoon.
Robin!
He hadn't seen his fiancée, Robin, since the party 2 days earlier.
Robin!
Concerned, the young man called Robin's mother.
Hello?
Yeah.
Edna Smith had assumed her daughter was with LaRon.
No, let me check just a minute. Robin?
She checked to see if Robin was in her old bedroom.
Robin? No, I haven't seen her.
Perhaps she'd come in late without being heard. LaRon told Edna not to worry.
Okay, I'll be there in a few minutes.
Maybe
all
Robin
right?
had decided to spend the rest of the weekend at their friend's house. About an hour later, LaRon and Robin's brother arrived at the apartment.
No one there. Yeah. I don't guess they have any choice.
With no sign of Robin, her family decided to call police. LaRon joined the Smiths at their house to wait for detectives from the Pierce County Sheriff's Office. They were all worried. Robin had never done anything like this before. They described Robin as a happy young woman, though quiet. She worked long hours as a waitress, saving most of her money to help pay for her upcoming wedding. Detective Terry Wilson and his partner initiated an investigation.
According to information we received from her mother, Miss Smith, it was unlike Robin to have just walked up and taken off. She was engaged to get married. She was close to her family. And every time she ever went any place her family was, she usually told them where she was going to be at. And so this was unlike her.
LaRon Crouston told detectives about the last night he'd seen Robin. Early in the morning of March 28th, Robin and LaRon hung out at a bar until it closed at 2 a.m. Some people they had met during the evening invited them to an after-hours party at their nearby apartment. The place was rented by Elizabeth Glynn and Darren D. O'Neill. LaRon and Robin were having such a good time they didn't want it to end. The last place LaRon had seen Robin was at the party.
Before you got to the dinner, what time did you?
Detective Wilson went to the duplex where the party had been held. He found Elizabeth Glynn at home. She corroborated LaRon's story and told the detective that she had intended to drive Robin home.
How long did you leave?
But as the night wore on, her plans changed. Darren seemed more interested in Robin, so Elizabeth remained in the kitchen and flirted with a man named Mike Prohoda. Elizabeth told the detective that she and Prohoda had made plans to meet later at his apartment, where they could be alone. Brehota left the party first to avoid arousing Darren's suspicions. By daybreak, Darren D. O'Neill hardly seemed to notice. He was wrapped up telling Robin about his favorite author, Louis L'Amour, who wrote stories about the Wild West. O'Neill was unemployed and talked about living off the land like the outdoorsman in L'Amour's books. Elizabeth had heard it all before. At about 8 a.m., she left the apartment to meet Brehota. She told O'Neill and Robin she was going out to buy more beer. When she returned 24 hours later, O'Neill and Robin were gone. Elizabeth pointed out that she found several items missing from the apartment.
In searching the apartment, we found that there was a television that had been pulled out and the television electrical cord had been removed. There was a couple of lamps from his girlfriend had told us that had extension cords on it. These were missing. A lot of his clothes were gone, and she specifically mentioned that there was a blanket that also was missing from the house.
Is this yours?
In a file box, Wilson also found Social Security cards with several different aliases. They included the unusual name of Zebulon McCranahan. When Detective Wilson told his partner what he'd learned, Detective Walt Stout immediately suspected foul play.
Robin was left alone with Darren O'Neill, and something happened at that residence after that. It would be speculation that maybe Darren tried to come on to her physically or sexually. She may have rejected that, or there was something that happened there, and I believe she was probably assaulted in that house.
Detectives' next question, Dennis Morrison, O'Neill's friend and former employer. Morrison said O'Neill had worked for him as a carpenter.
When's the last time you saw him?
It was last night. He asked if we're alone.
He said he had seen O'Neill just a few days earlier. It was Saturday afternoon, the day after the all-night party.
Running kind of low on cash, man. You ain't got about 30 bucks I can get from you,
O'Neill stopped by to ask for traveling money.
no cash on me at all.
He said he was heading east over the Cascade Mountains. Morrison had no cash to give him. O'Neill was about to leave when Morrison realized he could write him a check. He went to O'Neill's car to make the offer. His friend seemed nervous and anxious to leave. Then a movement in the back of the car caught Morrison's eye. It looked like something was pushing against the back seat from inside the trunk. O'Neill told him it was his dog. He put it there to punish it. Before Morrison could say another word, O'Neill pulled away.
That's all he said. Haven't heard from him since.
Morrison described the car as a tan Chrysler with Montana tags.
It was the day after the party.
Authorities knew they were 3 days behind O'Neill. By now, he could be anywhere. Detectives continued to pursue the handful of O'Neill's known contacts in the area. They called Gary Skinner, the owner of another cabinet shop where O'Neill had worked part-time. He told detectives he had been looking for Darren O'Neill since his last day at work.
When Darren left, he apparently took a hammer with him from the shop because it was missing, and Mr. Skinner couldn't account for it having been taken in any other way.
With no leads pointing to his whereabouts, Pierce County detectives hoped O'Neill's past would provide some answers. A background check revealed that the suspect was no stranger to trouble.
He had warrants out for him. He had been in trouble in Colorado. He had been accused of sexual assault, physical assault. All of his victims that we were aware of had been females. So a profile of him was starting to form that we was looking for a person who is Possibly predatory in nature, but violent for sure.
Pierce County deputies entered everything they knew about Darren D. O'Neill into the National Crime Information Database, the NCIC, a listing of criminals and victims nationwide. They included his physical characteristics, a description of his tattoos, and the make and model of his car. If O'Neill were picked up by any police department in the country, Pierce County would be notified immediately. Detectives also helped Robin's family launch a media campaign to locate the missing woman. Robin's picture was posted all over the Tacoma, Washington area, along with O'Neill's. The campaign began to generate leads. O'Neill was spotted entering a local hospital alone on March 29th.
There was no security at the hospital, but the ER nurses were nervous at this man's presence. So they did call a couple of male employees of the hospital, and Darren ultimately left without receiving any treatment for some scratches that were visible.
Investigators believed Robin had inflicted the scratches on O'Neill's face when he attacked her. The hospital staff told police that the scruffy man bore a teardrop tattoo at the corner of one eye. The letters J-U-N-E were tattooed across the knuckles of one hand. Detectives learned that June was the name of O'Neill's ex-wife. The media campaign continued to generate leads. A highway flagman had seen O'Neill in his car at 2 different locations on March 30th, 2 days after Robin's disappearance. The first sighting was on a highway construction site east of Tacoma.
Construction, just keep it slow.
O'Neill was heading south when the flagman waved him through.
Keep it slow, sir.
He also saw O'Neill a few hours later at a gas station off the same highway.
Hang on a second, I want you to take a look at some pictures.
He called police when he recognized the man's face from the newspaper. To be sure, the detective showed the flagman a photo lineup. It included a mugshot of O'Neill alongside 5 others. The flagman picked out O'Neill immediately. As investigators continued the hunt, a Washington state trooper spotted a tan Chrysler with Montana tags on the afternoon of March 30th. The same day the flagman had seen O'Neill. It had been abandoned on the side of Interstate 5, about 50 miles north of Pierce County, 2 days after Robin's disappearance. Unaware of the ongoing investigation, the officer found nothing suspicious about the car. He followed proper procedure by calling in the license plate and vehicle description. A communications officer entered the tag number into a database. The information should have triggered the NCIC listing on O'Neill and his vehicle. It did not. She had mistakenly typed the abbreviation MO for the state of Missouri instead of MT for Montana. The trooper on Highway 5 was still unaware that this was the very car Darren D. O'Neill had been driving following Robin Smith's disappearance. Investigators' best clue was about to be towed to the impound lot. On March 30th, 1987, a Washington state trooper found a tan Chrysler with Montana tags 50 miles east of Tacoma. Misinformed by his communications officer, the trooper was unaware that Darren D. O'Neill, the man wanted in connection with the disappearance of Robin Smith, had abandoned the car. The vehicle was towed to an impound lot for future sale. A few days later, the local paper ran an article about Robin Smith's abduction. The story described O'Neill's car. It sounded similar to a Chrysler the tow truck operator had recently impounded. He checked the make, model, and license plate. They matched. He quickly notified police. Detectives ran a check of the Chrysler's vehicle ID number. A man calling himself Zebulon McCranahan was reported to have stolen it from an Idaho residence in 1986. Wilson immediately remembered the peculiar name from an ID card he'd found at O'Neill's home. It was one of the suspect's aliases. At the Pierce County West Precinct garage, detectives and evidence technicians processed the Chrysler. They hoped to find some trace evidence linking O'Neill or Robin to the car. While technicians searched the interior, the detectives moved to the trunk. They found a large quantity of dried blood. Detectives also found a blood-stained lavender jacket. Mrs. Smith later identified the garment as Robin's. They also recovered teeth, bone chips, and a clump of hair. O'Neill's fingerprints on empty beer cans pointed to his involvement. If Detective Wilson had held out some slim hope that Robin was still alive, it was now gone.
We felt now that we probably had a homicide on our hands by the way the type of blood that was found in the trunk and the amount of blood that was found. And so we started focusing on Darren as a homicide suspect. And at this point in time, the whole tone of the investigation started changing.
But to charge O'Neill with murder, examiners at the Washington State Forensics Lab first needed to confirm that the hair and bone fragments belonged to Robin Smith. Pierce County sheriffs requested Robin's dental records and blood types sent to the lab. But there was a problem. Robin had not been to the dentist since childhood. She also had never documented her blood type. Since a definitive match with known samples could not be made, murder charges could not be filed. As the hunt for suspected killer Darren D. O'Neill ground to an abrupt halt, 120 miles to the north, Detective Carlotta Jarrett of the Bellingham, Washington Police Department was working on a similar case. Wendy Aughey, a 28-year-old single mother, was reported missing when she failed to pick up her daughter. Wendy had a date the evening of April 24th, 1987. She left her daughter with the child's grandmother. When Wendy failed to return her call, the grandmother drove over to her house to find the little girl's favorite pillow. On Wendy's bed, she found bloodstains and called the police. Detective Jarrett obtained a warrant to search the house. Wendy's car, a red Ford Torino, was missing. The front door to Wendy's house had been left unlocked. Her wallet and keys were missing. In the bedroom, Detective Jarrett found evidence of a brutal attack.
There was bodily fluids in the bed, and there was a great amount of pooled blood underneath that pillow, which had seeped to the mattress below. There was low to medium impact velocity blood spatters on a wall, and there were also blood smears on the wall.
Bellingham police retrieved the entire bed as evidence. On the headboard, they found more of Wendy's blood, along with 2 blonde hairs that did not belong to the missing woman. Police also recovered an acrylic fingernail. Wendy's friends told police that she had worn acrylic nails on her date with a man named Michael Johnson. Wendy had met Johnson earlier that afternoon on her lunch break. He was the new bartender at La Paloma restaurant. Detective Jarrett checked the restaurant for leads.
I contacted the owner to see if she'd filled out an employment application for Mr. Johnson, and the only thing she had was a placemat that he had written some information on. She gave that placemat to me, and we did process it for fingerprints.
While the detective waited for results, she visited a local mission which the bartender had listed on the placemat as his residence. Detective Jarrett spoke to the desk clerk at the mission, who remembered the day Johnson checked out.
He had seen Mr. Johnson at the mission at 7:30 in the morning on the day after that Wendy he had a date with him. And at that time he was wearing black slacks, a vest, a white shirt and a tie, and told him he was going to work. He also said he had met a lady and he was going to move in with her. This person also said that Mr. Johnson was driving a red Torino and drove away in it. Previous to this point, he'd had no vehicle.
On May 4th, 1987, Jarrett received a phone call from police in Eugene, Oregon. They had found Wendy's car, a red Ford Torino, abandoned in the parking lot of a tavern. Inside, police recovered fingerprints that matched the fingerprints found on the placemat. A check through the automated fingerprint identification system revealed that the prints belonged to Darren D. O'Neill, the man wanted for the suspected murder of Robin Smith. Detective Jarrett contacted authorities in Pierce County, 120 miles south of Bellingham. They quickly realized there were striking similarities in both cases.
Since we were convinced that Darren O'Neill was responsible for Robin Smith's death, and we also felt that he was responsible for Wendy Ahi's disappearance and possible death, we felt that the rest of the people in the country were also at great risk from Darren O'Neill.
Pierce County deputies called in the FBI to assist in the hunt. Former Special Agent Del Oros of the FBI's Tacoma Resident Agency was assigned the case.
At that point, we knew we were dealing with an individual who was extremely mobile and extremely dangerous. He had the history of a violent sexual predator, and now he had the current tag or label of a murderer.
Since Wendy and Robin's bodies were still missing, formal murder charges were not filed. Sexual assault charges against O'Neill were still pending in Colorado. The FBI opened a federal case against the fugitive for unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. Still, O'Neill managed to stay one step ahead. No one knew where the suspected serial killer fled after he left Oregon. And authorities still had no murder case unless they found the bodies of the missing women. In May 1987, evidence pointed to the brutal slaying of 2 innocent women in Washington state. The FBI and local police launched a media campaign to flush out suspected killer Darren D. O'Neill. Dozens of agents fanned out to investigate sightings all over the Pacific Northwest.
Yes.
O'Neill was spotted hitchhiking at truck stops north and south of Seattle. One trucker gave O'Neill a ride on May 23rd. He claimed his passenger thanked him for the ride because the cops were after him. The trucker pulled off the highway a short time later and left O'Neill just a few miles outside the city. Special Agent Del Oros recalled that even as leads came in, the hunt for the elusive killer did not get any easier.
The months immediately following the disappearance of Robin Smith and Wendy Ahi were extremely frustrating. Because of O'Neill's change in facial appearance, a change in weight, people were consistently telling us that the pictures that we were showing of O'Neill were actually two different people. Well, they weren't.
The FBI focused on places the drifter might blend in. Because O'Neill was constantly on the move, agents questioned travelers at local bus and train stations. They hoped someone had spotted O'Neill and would remember his distinctive tattoos. Even when they found people who had seen the fugitive, it was always too late. O'Neill was comfortable in the ever-changing world of transients and drifters, where people could easily disappear forever.
It wasn't as though we were going to find Darren O'Neill at the local Ramada Inn. It forced us to take a hard look at the reality of having to search for him in places where he would blend in very, very easily. By way of example, we looked in bus stops, homeless shelters, day labor camps. He was certainly not anyone who was going to be holding a 9-to-5 job, which really did increase the difficulty in trying to find him as the pursuit went on through the subsequent months.
While agents and detectives continued to pursue hundreds of mostly false sightings, detectives were called to the rural area surrounding Crystal Mountain, just east of Washington State's Mount Rainier. Hikers had reported finding what appeared to be human remains. The location was close to where a flagman had seen O'Neill's car about a month earlier, not long after Robin Smith's disappearance. Just inside the wood line, officers spotted a jawbone and a skull. Each item was carefully flagged before it was retrieved. As Stout and Wilson surveyed the crime scene, they wondered whether the remains were Robin's. Investigators also found other bones scattered in the vicinity. Folded clothing was found, hidden in the base of a nearby tree. It matched the description of the outfit Robin had worn to the party. They also recovered a wallet. Inside, they found Robin Smith's driver's license. Investigators fanned out to cover a wide area. Their persistence paid off. They found a claw hammer with markings similar to the one reported missing by one of O'Neill's former employers. Detectives also suspected it was the murder weapon. The Pierce County medical examiner agreed. A careful examination of the remains revealed that Robin had probably died as the result of blunt force trauma to the head. Darren D. O'Neill was charged with first-degree murder.
Once the remains of Robin Smith were found, we certainly had the confirmation that a murder had occurred. And by virtue of that murder, the Washington federal authorities then issued their own separate and second investigation. They issued another unlawful flight to avoid prosecution warrant for him.
The FBI was more determined than ever to get their hands on the man responsible for this heinous crime. By June of 1987, the FBI had issued 2 federal warrants for the arrest of suspected serial killer Darren D. O'Neill, still on the loose in the Pacific Northwest. The remains of one woman had been recovered close to Mount Rainier. The second woman was still missing and presumed dead. Since O'Neill was last known to be in Eugene, Oregon, Special Agent Michael Elsey of the FBI's Portland field office was called in.
knowing that he was a sexual predator. I went and checked with the local police agencies with some of their sexual assault cases to see if his MO fit any of, or description or anything fit any of their pending cases.
Special Agent O'Donnell, Detective Smith.
It meant hundreds of man-hours, but agents refused to simply wait for another sighting or another victim. Dozens of agents met with detectives in districts across the region to try to link O'Neill to outstanding sexual assault cases. The search was complicated by the fact that O'Neill looked very different in each of his mugshots. Most often, the agents left empty-handed. Frustrated and out of leads, agents continued to wade through hundreds of old case files. With a dangerous predator on the prowl, agents had to exhaust every possibility. An agent met with police detective Bill Carter in Portland. As he had done a dozen times before, the agent compared O'Neill's picture to sketches of sexual predators. One sketch stood out. It bore a strong resemblance to the fugitive. A 14-year-old girl named Heidi Lang had provided the drawing 5 months earlier when she filed rape charges against her unknown attacker. From the police report, her description of the crime sounded eerily similar to O'Neill's other assaults.
From looking at the photos of Mr. O'Neill, especially when he had a beard and the glasses, I saw that there was quite a bit of resemblance between the two, and the method and MO were similar as well. Luckily, he did not kill Miss Lang, as he had other subjects.
Agent Elsie wanted to speak with Heidi Lang as soon as possible. Detective Carter arranged a meeting between the young girl and the FBI.
12 o'clock, a little bit after.
With her mother by her side, she told the story from the beginning. At around midnight on January 17, 1987, 2 months before Robin Smith disappeared, Heidi broke her mother's curfew and walked to the nearby convenience store to get a soda. It was a tough part of town. The young girl had walked it many times before, but never this late at night. As she crossed an overpass leading to the store, a trucker called to her from his parked rig. She ignored him and walked on. It only took her a few minutes to get the soda. Then she started back home. She walked as quickly as she could to get back before her mother knew she had left. Heidi told investigators that as she approached the overpass, the man and the truck were gone. But on the other side of the overpass, the trucker jumped out of the bushes and grabbed her.
Get in the truck! Get in the truck! Get in!
He forced her down an embankment at knife point and shoved her into his semi parked at the side of the highway. Years later, Heidi recalls that she believed her young life was over.
The first thing I noticed is how dangerous he was. I felt that he had every intention of killing me. There was no question in my mind.
Get him back!
He threw her into the sleeper compartment of his truck. She was terrified, with no idea where he might take her or what he might do.
He threatened to make me a whore, sell me to pimps. He was gonna cut me open if I tried finding what was going to keep from angering this man. I had to behave like I was just holding conversation with him, and at the same time learn what I could about him.
Despite Heidi's best efforts, the trucker climbed into the sleeper compartment and repeatedly raped the 14-year-old for 4 hours.
And he did not like to think of you as a woman. That brought him to violence. I had to keep him talking, mostly to keep his mind off other things. And I tried my best to give him the impression that I was insignificant. And I was just there to be there with him. And it wouldn't mean anything if he let me go.
Heidi's insight and courage paid off. After suffering hours of abuse, her tormentor let her go. She ran until she reached a truck stop. She asked an employee for a ride home. After all she'd been through, Heidi bravely submitted to a rape test. This provided investigators with samples of the rapist's semen, though no match could be made until the suspect was in custody. When Heidi finished her story, Detective Carter showed her a number of photos of O'Neill and some similar-looking men.
It was amazing that he was in it, and I did see him. And I picked him out. I really did not expect to see him in them. I hadn't really heard anything since I had given the sketch.
Seeing her attacker's face brought the memories flooding back, but she never hesitated to press charges. Heidi was determined to face her rapist and put him behind bars.
I think that she wanted to see that this person did not do that to anyone else ever again. And so it showed very much strength in her character, and especially at the age of 14, being able to be so descriptive in the events that occurred, the description of the subject and him, that kind of got us to the path where we were.
Agent Elsie called the Tacoma office. They finally had a witness to testify against O'Neill.
He had run other places,
but they still had to find him. Agent Del Oros called FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C. to request additional assistance. On June 18, 1987, Darren D. O'Neill's name was placed on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. The case was now a priority for every FBI office in the country. Agents had to find O'Neill before he could strike again. In June of 1987, suspected serial killer Darren D. O'Neill was added to the FBI's 10 most wanted list. Special Agent Del Oros was in charge of the case. He convinced the FBI's Fugitive Publicity Unit in Washington, D.C. that Darren D. O'Neill fit the list's criteria.
The Bureau's determination as to who goes on to the top 10 wanted list is a function of a lot of different factors. Primarily, it's the protection of the community. Secondarily, it has to do with the ability of those individuals to be mobile, to transport themselves across interstate lines, so effectively going from state to state.
With nationwide publicity, the manhunt for O'Neill was relentless. Countless sightings were reported in several states. O'Neill was most often spotted in bars and taverns in the Northwest.
Looking for a guy may have been seen around here.
Investigators followed up on dozens of leads, only to find witnesses with vague descriptions of the fugitive. Nobody knew of his whereabouts.
Anything noticeable about his appearance?
Agents were left with little to go on.
Okay, thank you very much.
So we had a long stretch of time when the clues were drying up. The leads from other agents were not producing any form of immediate return. We were going back and to the same people, consistently re-interviewing the family, friends. We were reaching out as far as going to prior instructors, prior employers, looking for some type of clue that would tell us or show us a pattern of his activity and his mobility across the country.
7 months later, on February 3rd, 1988, agents discovered that O'Neill had made his way to Lakeland, Florida. He was spotted by a Lakeland police officer conducting what appeared to be a drug deal.
Got some good stuff. You got the money?
The officer was unaware that O'Neill was wanted for murder. O'Neill noticed the cop but did nothing. The officer turned his car around to investigate. When the cruiser pulled past the stopped car, O'Neill pulled up and asked for directions, pretending he was lost. The officer asked him to pull over. Instead, O'Neill took off. The officer followed, calling in the Louisiana tags on O'Neill's car as he drove. O'Neill tried to lose him, zigzagging through the streets of Lakeland. When their car jumped a curb, the suspects ran.
On foot, chasing a white male.
The officer pursued on foot and eventually caught them all.
Your car, where are you at in your car?
O'Neill was extradited to Louisiana when police learned the car he'd been driving was reported stolen from that state. When asked, O'Neill told police his name was Jean Mayeux.
A clerk who was working nights compared the fingerprints of the individual that she knew as Jean Mayeux to the list of fingerprints associated with FBI top 10 wanted fugitives and found that the individual that she knew as Jean Mayeux was the individual that we knew as Darren O'Neill.
O'Neill was extradited to Washington State to face charges. But state prosecutors knew their cases were weak. Since Wendy Aughey's body was never recovered, O'Neill could not be charged with her murder. The Robin Smith case was stronger, but lacked definitive forensic identification. It would be difficult to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the body found in the woods was Robin Smith's. Despite the evidentiary obstacles, prosecutors moved ahead with the Robin Smith case. They would take their chances with a jury. O'Neill and his attorney would never let the case get that far. In a Pierce County court on January 4th, 1989, O'Neill pled guilty to first-degree murder in the killing of Robin Smith. Detective Wilson knew there was an ulterior motive behind the plea.
The court system in the state of Washington at that time was if a person was convicted of first-degree murder, but there was a loophole in there. If you pled guilty to the charge, the maximum time you got was 333 months.
The family of Robin Smith was devastated. Even without parole, O'Neill would be free well before the end of his natural life. The killers still face charges in Portland, Oregon for the kidnapping and rape of 14-year-old Heidi Lang. If convicted, O'Neill would be put away for life. But prosecutors had a problem. Deputy District Attorney Charles Sparks recalls that the rape kit Heidi had provided at the time of her assault would not be admissible for a comparison with O'Neill.
There was a sexual assault kit that included vaginal swabs that were taken, and that had molded because of the way these things were stored back then, and it was not usable. And DNA evidence would have been very helpful, but we just didn't have it.
On May 16, 1990, as O'Neill's trial began, prosecutors knew their only chance was to put Heidi on the witness stand to face her attacker. It would be traumatic for her, but it was their best hope for putting O'Neill behind bars for good.
So it was very difficult for me to testify at the trial. It was even more difficult to look at him face to face. It was very frightening, very scary experience. First of all, at this point, I had promised this man that I wouldn't tell anybody what happened. And this is a man who had no qualms about going after anybody, even just a girl walking down the street in the middle of the night. I knew I had to put him away, or I was as good as dead. That's the way I view it.
From here today, could you point to that man?
Heidi pointed out the man who had kidnapped and raped her, sitting sullenly just a few yards in front of her. Her testimony was enough to convict O'Neill. The jury found him guilty on all 16 counts of kidnapping and rape. Under Oregon law, he was sentenced to 135 years in prison. Darren D. O'Neill is serving his first sentence of 27 years at a Washington State penitentiary. He will then be transferred to Oregon to spend the rest of his life behind bars.
Once he was convicted, I was able to put a lot of this in the past. I was able to put it away. And that was most important to me. That's the most, I don't think I would have ever gotten over this if we hadn't put him away.
For Agent Oros, though he has since left the FBI to serve as Deputy District Attorney in Sacramento, California, the case remains fresh in his mind.
Well, to this very day, I still have the wanted flyer for Darren O'Neill hanging in my office here at the District Attorney's office. He, even on the wall, is a constant reminder of the dangers that face each and every one of us as we go out on the street. I'm particularly aware of the fact that he represents a significant danger to the women in society. He's an individual that was a cold, calculated murder, and he reaffirms for me that I'm in a profession that matters, and that every day when I go into court, I'm there to make a difference.
A young girl set out to run an errand for her mother. As the minutes ticked by, it became clear she did not simply wander off. With no clues to her whereabouts, local authorities called in the FBI to help. Vicki Lynn Hoskinson was going only a few blocks, but the search for her would spread to 3 states.
Every parent faces the question, when is a child old enough to leave the house alone? For mother in Tucson, her 8-year-old daughter's bike ride to the corner mailbox turned into a 2-month nightmare. Under the federal kidnapping statute, the FBI can enter a case after 24 hours. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. It would take dozens of agents working in 2 states to track down a paroled sex offender. But it would take a mother's courage to change the laws that released a monster.
Monday, September 17th, 1984. At around 3 in the afternoon in Flowing Wells, Arizona, outside Tucson, 8-year-old Vicki Lynn Hoskinson, just home from school, was helping her mom send a belated birthday card to her aunt. Because her big sister was staying late at school for track practice, Vicki asked her mom if she could mail the card by herself. The mailbox was little more than 2 blocks away. After telling her daughter to be back before 3:30, Debbie Carlson gave her consent to her elated youngest daughter. According to Mrs. Carlson, the trip to the mailbox and back would take less than 10 minutes.
I sent Vicki by herself, which was the first time I'd ever sent any one of my children by themselves to run an errand. We always used the buddy system.
Little Vicki Lynn Hoskinson was on her first big solo adventure. According to her mother, she beamed with pride over the responsibility she had been given. She promised to come right home after mailing the card. About 20 minutes after Vicki left, Debbie Carlson was reassured by the sound of the front door.
Stephanie?
And a little surprised to see that it was Vicki's older sister, Stephanie.
Do me a favor, go look for your sister.
Her track practice had been canceled.
Vicki went down to the mailbox.
Mrs. Carlson told her that Vicki went out to mail a letter but hadn't returned. Stephanie thought her sister might be playing with a friend.
Stephanie goes, "Oh, I'll go look for her. She probably stopped at Jennifer's house." So Stephanie, the second time in one day, I sent one of my kids without the buddy system.
Stephanie found Vicki's bike lying on the side of the road.
Vicki!
She called her little sister's name.
Vicki!
She hurried home to tell her mom.
Well, right away, that was an antenna for me because Vicki would have never left her bike in the middle of the street. That was her pride and joy. It was, she took care of that bike like it was, you know, a prized possession.
Debbie Carlson drove to the spot with her daughter to collect Vicki's bike.
Vicki!
Stephanie checked the house nearby to see if anyone had seen her little sister. No one answered. Shortly after loading Vicki's abandoned bike into the car, Mrs. Carlson was overwhelmed by emotion.
I was on my way back home. I just uncontrollably started crying. It was like I knew something was wrong. It just was so out of character, something was wrong.
All right, when's the last time you seen your dog?
Mrs. Carlson called the Pima County Sheriff's Office. She also called Mr. Carlson home from work. The little girl had been missing less than 90 minutes, but concern within the community grew quickly.
Everybody's reaction was the same, that there was something wrong. There was something not right with the situation.
Debbie Carlson provided photos of Vicki to deputies from the Pima County Sheriff's Department. Police retraced her route to see where she might have encountered trouble. Her destination was the mailbox in front of a convenience store near a busy intersection, only a few blocks away from her home.
Yes, sir. How you doing? Okay, Tom Kernan.
A deputy asked the manager if he'd seen the 8-year-old.
Have you seen this girl? Have you seen her? Do you recognize her?
The manager recognized her from previous visits, but hadn't seen her that day.
Have you seen her in the last, say, hour or 2 hours?
Deputies also canvassed the surrounding neighborhood. They checked first at her best friend's house. Mrs. Spencer said that neither she nor her daughter had seen Vicky that day. Then her 5-year-old son spoke up.
Have you seen Vicky?
He said Vicky had stopped by earlier looking for Jennifer.
Hey, is Jennifer home?
After he told her she wasn't home, Vicky rode off toward her house, apparently having already mailed her card. As the little boy finished his story, 2 older boys approached the deputy. They said they'd also seen Vicky riding away from the convenience store. Just minutes before they rode past her, they saw a small black car with California plates. It was moving so slowly they passed it on their bikes. They said it was heading in Vicky's direction, but they didn't wait to see if it passed her. And they never noticed the driver. A slow-moving out-of-state car, appearing at around the same time Vicky vanished, struck the investigators as suspicious. Although it simply may have been someone's guest looking for a house number, the sheriff had to consider the possibility that the little girl could have been abducted. Authorities take a case like this very seriously. They've learned to expect and brace for the worst. The sheriff called in homicide detective Gary Damers.
The sheriff decided that it was important to have the homicide detail handle this particular case because of the disappearance of Vicki Lynn Hoskinson. It was felt that she had been abducted and that we were looking at a case that could eventually become a homicide case. So we were called out a little earlier than usual.
A few hours later, a command center was set up at the nearby elementary school, which was closed for the day. It became the clearinghouse for any information, any leads. As word of Vicky's disappearance spread, there was no trouble finding volunteers to man the phones.
That's correct.
The calls poured in.
Along with that, would you like to get some amplified?
Sheriff's deputies, along with hundreds of volunteers, organized a search of the area. They systematically moved out in concentric circles from Vicky's last known sighting. They combed the fields for some sign of the girl. But none was found. Even the dogs couldn't pick up her scent.
You know, before you know it, the minutes turned into half hour into hour, and more law enforcement, more deputies started coming. People within the neighborhood started coming over, and everybody started looking for Vicki.
A deputy remained at the house should new information come available or a ransom call be made. Hours passed with no word. The only calls were from concerned friends and family.
No, they don't.
In terms of news, there was still nothing.
Okay.
Still,
thank you.
no Vicki. Under the federal kidnapping statute, the Pima County Sheriff's Department was empowered to ask the FBI to enter the case. On day 2 of Vicki's disappearance, Special Agent Larry Bagley from the FBI's Tucson field office took the assignment.
The evidence was simply that a young child who was very responsible left home, and her bicycle is found in the middle of the street, and she never returned home. And that was enough to trigger our entry under the kidnapping statute.
In the case of a missing child, chances for a safe return increase when immediate action is taken. The FBI had the power to extend the investigation beyond the state of Arizona if necessary. The agent's participation gave Debbie Carlson hope for a quick resolution. A few blocks away at the command center in the elementary school, deputies and volunteers continued to work the phones. By now, it seemed that all of Tucson knew about the disappearance of the 4-foot-tall, 60-pound girl with auburn hair. And it seemed like everyone was calling.
Okay, thank you.
Some were pranksters, some merely misinformed. All had to be answered, filtered, and processed. Finally, among the dozens of hopeful but futile tips and leads, one call held a glimmer of hope. A woman called to report that she thought she saw Vicki Lynn Hoskinson at the mall the previous evening.
Hi, can I please
She was a
speak to
clerk at a
detective?
toy store.
No, I
She
want
told
this
authorities that a woman in a wide-brimmed hat came in with an upset little girl who looked like Vicki Lynn to her. The woman tried to placate the child with a toy. She paid cash for the purchase, pulling it out of an envelope. The clerk also noticed that she carried a shopping bag from another store in the mall. After paying, the two left, arguing over what to have for dinner. The clerk agreed to come to the command center to provide a sketch. From her description, a police artist created a composite drawing of the customer.
What about her nose?
It was their first real lead. From the way the woman was described treating the girl, investigators believe she may have lost a child and was trying desperately to replace it with someone else's. While it was reassuring to think that Vicki was being cared for by her abductor, the theory had some nagging inconsistencies for Agent Bagley.
It was pretty unlikely to me that someone would have taken Vicki Lynn and then taken her to a public place and to be seen with her. That and the fact that Debbie said that Vicki Lynn would never knowingly accompany a stranger in public and not try to get away.
But perhaps Vicki did not run from the woman because she was not a stranger to the child. Investigators returned to Vicki's neighborhood, hoping that someone would recognize the sketch and provide a name.
Give me a call.
I sure will.
They found no one who could.
Sure will. Yeah, thank you. You guys have a good day.
A number of leads that identified, or people believe they identified this woman, were telephoned into the command post, and each one of those leads were followed up by an investigator or a detective.
Ma'am? Excuse me.
Investigators canvassed the mall, including the store
FBI
whose
agent
shopping
Bagley.
bag the woman had carried.
This is Officer Nolan from the Sheriff's Department. Look at this sketch.
The clerk there
Lady that we
recognized the
believe was
woman, remembering that a little girl was with her, and even commenting that the woman had worn a wide-brimmed hat which wasn't included in the sketch. As new witnesses came forward, all of Tucson held its breath with the hope that Vicki Lynn Hoskinson would be found alive. By the second day of the search for 8-year-old Vicki Lynn Hoskinson, the news coverage was extensive. Local and national news teams broadcast hourly updates. Though Vicki was reportedly seen in the Tucson Mall the night before, arguing with a strange woman, it seemed implausible to agents and deputies that if Vicki were still alive, her abductor would have taken her to a public place. Investigators continued to search in nearby rural areas. They also continued to prepare themselves and Vicky's mother, Debbie Carlson, for the worst.
I remember them coming in and the second day on Tuesday and wanting access to Vicky's room. You know, they made us close up her room and they started taking hair samples from her bed. They took her sheets, they took her pillow, they took her hairbrush. They took all these things and almost like, you know, they were preparing a homicide case, is basically was what they were doing. And I was not real receptive to that, you know, because in my mind, this was not going to be a homicide case.
Despite their doubts, investigators continued to pursue their only lead. They needed to identify the woman in the mall whom a witness believed had abducted Vicky.
We're gonna go get something to eat.
At the nearby high school, a student thought he recognized the woman's face. He said he saw the woman with the little girl in a dark-colored car the previous afternoon. He recalled the car was a black Monte Carlo. A little girl who resembled Vicky was looking out of the window. He believed that the woman driving was the same one depicted in the sketch. Investigators wondered if it was the same car seen earlier in the neighborhood by the two boys on the bikes.
Okay.
The Monte Carlo that was seen was a lead for us because it sounded like it had a great deal of potential, but there wasn't much we could do with it. We did look for Monte Carlos and had got no hits with that.
At the command center, witnesses of all ages were coming forward. A mother came in with her 3-year-old.
Couldn't have been more.
She helped her son describe to investigators what he had seen the day before. They lived across the street from where Vicky Lynn's bike was found. Earlier that afternoon, she told the detective her son was playing in the front yard. While she went into the house for just a moment, the boy said he saw a little girl on a pink bike being knocked down by what he called a black race car. He said a big girl with long hair got out of the car and helped the little girl in. Then they drove off. This little boy had apparently witnessed the abduction of Vicky Lynn Hoskinson. His portrayal of events rekindled suspicions that Vicky may have been abducted by the woman from the mall. But he was too young to give any more useful details. And his mother hadn't seen or heard anything. Agents checked the spot where Vicky Lynn's bike had been found to see if anything had been overlooked. Agent Bagley made a crucial find. Something that hadn't been reported earlier.
There was a fresh gouge on the post about 16 or 18 inches above the ground, which was not the contact point for a large car. So it looked to me like it was fresh. It certainly appeared to me that perhaps the car that had hit the bicycle had run into this post.
He surmised that the small black car with California plates spotted just yards away could have been the car that struck the post at that height.
There's no evidence of
The agent asked if any other investigators had received reports of a black out-of-state car in the area.
Witnesses, I interviewed 2 young boys.
One detective had. Earlier that day, he had taken a statement from Sam Hall, the coach at the elementary school. Hall reported seeing a suspicious vehicle at the schoolyard at about 3 o'clock on September 17th, just 20 minutes before Vicky was last seen in the neighborhood. He said he first noticed a low black car with California tags, driving slowly near the schoolyard. Then he noticed that the driver was watching the children at play. He described the driver as male, with long hair and a beard. Hall told Detective Damers that when he looked at the stranger's face, a chill went up and down his spine.
He described it as his hair raising on the back of his neck when he saw this individual. So he kept a close eye on this subject.
As the man began to drive off, Hall had the presence of mind to jot down his license number. The next day, when the gym teacher had heard that Vicky Lynn Hoskinson was missing, he believed that his sighting might be relevant.
When we obtained the license number from Sam Hall and heard his story, it got me pretty excited because this was probably the break we were looking for.
It would take several hours for the FBI to trace the license number to the car's owner. Investigators were uncertain if there was any connection between the strange woman at the mall and the bearded man in the car.
Each investigator in this case was highly charged with emotion because every hour that passes makes the likelihood that Vicky Lynn would be recovered safely, it diminished with every hour.
Time conspired against them, and hope for Vicky Lynn's safe return began to falter as day 2 came to a close. September 19th, 1984. Day 3 in the hunt for Vicky Lynn Hoskinson. While the license plate for the small black car was being traced, investigators continued collecting statements from potential witnesses. Another neighborhood woman came in to describe how her child was almost abducted. The woman told investigators that she'd been doing laundry in her apartment building. While she was busy with the machine, a woman came in and tried to lure her child away. The mother managed to drive her off.
Leave us alone.
Sketch right here.
Police showed the witness their sketch of the woman from the shopping mall.
Was this the lady?
No.
Is that her?
The drawing did not look like the woman who grabbed her boy, but the mother couldn't be sure.
That's not.
Police canvassed the area and found the woman in question. She was a fixture in the neighborhood, eccentric but ultimately harmless.
Have you ever seen this child?
She was released. Another one of 200 or so dead ends that investigators pursued. Each one meant dashed hopes. Late that afternoon, Mrs. Carlson held a press conference with her family. She pleaded for Vicky's safe return. By reaching out to millions of people through the evening news, she hoped someone would come forward with information on her young daughter's whereabouts.
One minute I had hope they were going to find her, and the next minute I was waiting for them to walk through the door and tell me they found her body. And it was a roller coaster. It's like, am I going to be having a funeral in 3 days? Am I going to have my daughter in my arms in 3 days? Is she going to be one of those missing kids that is missing forever?
The FBI was inching closer to the answer. The trace on the license plate led to a 28-year-old Los Angeles man named Frank Jarvis Atwood. Agents gave the information to the FBI Identification Division to check for priors.
About 10 o'clock that evening, we received by fax a rap sheet from the Identification Division, and that about blew our mind because we noticed that there was a prior conviction for child molestation and another for kidnapping.
Frank Atwood was currently out on parole in California. Arizona FBI alerted agents there. They decided not to tell the Carlsons until they knew more. The following morning, day 4 in the case of Vicki Lynn Hoskinson, agents went to the LA address where Atwood's vehicle was registered. It was the home of Atwood's parents, retired Army Brigadier General Frank Atwood Sr. and his wife.
Ms. Atwood, Mr. Atwood, I'd like to ask you.
The Atwoods acknowledged that their son had committed crimes in the past. They also told investigators that he had visited a few days earlier, but they didn't know where he was now. Agents told them that he might be involved in the kidnapping of a child, and time was of the essence.
I'll tell you what, I'm gonna give you my business card.
Neither parent had any information to share.
I'll leave it right here on the table. If he does get in contact with either one,
Agents left their business cards in case the Atwoods learned anything new.
The mother was very protective of him, and the father listened to the pleas that perhaps if we acted soon enough, that perhaps Vicki Lynn might be recovered alive.
A few hours after the agents left, the Atwoods received a call.
Where are you? Mom?
It was their son, Frank. He needed their help. He said his car had broken down in Texas and he needed money wired to him so he could get it fixed. His mother took down the address and told him not to worry. His father copied it and left the house.
I need to tell you that my son...
He went to a payphone and called the FBI.
At Chuck's garage.
He gave them the address of the garage in Kerrville, Texas, where his son Frank and a friend awaited money for a new transmission. The California office called agents in Arizona, who in turn called agents in Texas with a request to apprehend Frank Atwood. The Texas Bureau called the garage.
Yeah.
The manager confirmed that Atwood was there with one other man. He didn't see anyone else with them. He did not know if Atwood was armed. Agents asked him to stall the fugitive until an arrest team arrived. The wheels were set in motion for the arrest of Frank Atwood. There was one more call that Agent Bagley wasn't sure he should make.
The problem is whether or not to let the parents know that we have a good lead on this. It's breaking extremely fast. We're worried about whether Vicki Lynn is with him in that car, and all sorts of things go through your mind.
Ultimately, they decided to inform the Carlsons of this sudden turnabout in the case of their missing daughter. The story was too big to keep under wraps for much longer.
They came over before the arrest was made, and they briefed us that they were about to make an arrest in another state. And it was going to be on the TV, and basically they briefed us on the situation, who they were going to be arresting. There was no signs of Vicki. They had him under surveillance.
Without any idea about where the little girl might be, or even if she were still alive, federal agents moved in to arrest Frank Atwood for kidnapping.
Stay out here, sir.
4 days after Vicki Lynn Hoskinson disappeared from Arizona, the FBI made an arrest in Kerrville, Texas. Frank Atwood and his traveling companion James McDonald were picked up without incident at an auto repair garage and held for suspected kidnapping. There was no sign of Vicki. Gary Damers of the Tucson Sheriff's Department headed to Texas to interrogate him.
He told us that he would speak to us about certain things, and there are certain things that he would not speak to us about. Some of the information that he provided was that he, in fact, was in the Tucson area.
On Romero Street.
Atwood's history of child molesting and kidnapping made him a likely suspect in the case. Atwood admitted to being in Vicki's neighborhood on Monday, September 17th, the day she disappeared. He said he'd been staying in a nearby park. At about 3 o'clock, he left to buy drugs and returned to the park 2 hours later, around 5 p.m. He wouldn't account for his whereabouts during those 2 lost hours. He claimed he was not responsible for Vicki's disappearance. James McDonald corroborated Atwood's story. On the day in question, he told investigators that he and Atwood had had an argument in the park at about 3 o'clock. Just after that, Atwood left in his car for about 2 hours. McDonald said that when Atwood returned around 5 o'clock, he had blood on his hands and clothing. Atwood told him he'd gotten into a fight with a drug dealer and stabbed him.
Get anything off him?
McDonald also gave authorities the names of other people in Tucson that he and Atwood hung around with. Most were transients. Officially, focus shifted away from the mysterious woman at the mall and centered on Atwood. But Debbie Carlson didn't want to entirely give up on the mall lady theory.
At first, I really wanted to stick to that theory, that it was probably a woman possibly who'd lost a child, was trying to replace the child. And I think that's what kept me going that first week, was that possibly it was someone would be someone who would be taking care of her.
Though Mrs. Carlson held out hope, investigators were less optimistic about a happy ending.
Hey, Mom, I love you. I love you too.
When he was arrested and she wasn't with him, the reality really started to set in, that those last words, "I love you," were the last words I was going to hear my daughter say to me.
While the FBI scrambled for a warrant to search Atwood's car, agents and Arizona authorities returned to Tucson the next day to track down the other park dwellers mentioned by McDonald. Investigators found 2 men who said that Atwood had spent a few nights in their trailer. One of the men, known as Mad Dog, recalled seeing him there Monday night, the night of Vicki's disappearance. His story supported what Atwood's traveling companion Jim McDonald told the FBI.
McDonald said that he had observed Atwood on Monday afternoon with bloody clothes and blood on his knife and on his boots. Mad Dog said the same thing separately, that he had observed the same thing at his trailer, and that they had even discussed that Atwood should get rid of his bloody clothes and the knife.
Agents presented a warrant and searched the trailer for any evidence that might suggest kidnapping or murder. Initially, it looked as if the search proved fruitful. They collected a blanket that appeared to be bloodstained, along with a hairbrush believed to be Atwood's. Both were subjected to a battery of blood and fiber tests. Both revealed nothing. Atwood's clothes and knife were never found. The search continued, both for evidence against Atwood and for some trace of the victim.
FBI agents and detectives, including myself, continued to search for Vicki Lynn Hoskinson. There was a certain amount of frustration that had set in because we were unable to locate her. The area is vast. It's a lot of desert, and trying to use all the investigative skills available, we had been unable to locate her. But we continued to pursue any type of lead.
Though clues to Vicki's whereabouts were scarce, detectives continued to canvass the park where Atwood had spent most of his time while in Tucson. Agents found a couple who knew Frank Atwood. They also claimed to have seen the suspect in blood-stained clothes the day Vicki disappeared. Like the others, Atwood told them that he had stabbed a double-crossing drug dealer. While that was certainly possible, the timing of the knifing, exactly at the time of Vicki's disappearance, seemed to stretch coincidence. Though investigators now had corroborating stories that suggested Atwood's guilt, they still had no physical evidence and no body. To prove that Vicki had been in his car, they needed to match some hair or fiber from the car with ones collected from the victim's bedroom. It didn't turn out that way.
We didn't get a hair or fibers or blood that we could identify. During that time, and even at this time, the best forensic experts in the country were at the FBI, and they were the ones that processed the vehicle. So I truly believe that if there was something in there that could have been found, it would have been found.
What agents were looking for wasn't inside the car, but rather outside it. FBI examiners lifted a sample of paint from Vicki's bike to compare to a speck of pink paint found on Atwood's front bumper. The paint speck, just a few millimeters wide, was tested at the FBI's Materials Analysis Unit. The examiner first assigned the case passed away shortly after completing the tests. Former Special Agent Examiner James Corby would re-examine the minute evidence.
Usually, the victim of a crime, you have no association with the victim or the family, and we work so many of those cases that you try not to get involved, but it's very, very difficult when a crime involves a baby or a small child, somebody that's defenseless, and you find yourself, I think, working harder to try to establish something in the case. But if it's not there, I mean, it's not there. But you certainly, I think, take a more critical look at that case, and I think it's human nature.
In microscopic and chemical tests, Corby determined the bicycle's paint and the paint found on the bumper matched. Corby also found chrome plating from the bumper smeared on the bike.
So what we have here is an interchange of materials. The paint from the victim's bicycle was on the suspect's car. The plating from the suspect's car is on the victim's bicycle. And this interchange of materials establishes contact between the bicycle and the suspect's vehicle.
It was good, but without a body, it would not be enough to charge Frank Atwood Jr. with the murder of Vicki Lynn Hoskinson. Authorities braced themselves for a difficult case with few witnesses, few visible clues, and no body. The case against Atwood could easily slip through any one of those cracks. Almost 3 weeks after little Vicki Lynn Hoskinson disappeared off a street in her Tucson neighborhood, Frank Atwood Jr. was arrested in Texas and charged with kidnapping. Vicki was still missing and presumed dead. Investigators knew that if her body was not recovered, prosecution for murder would be next to impossible. The Tucson community, living this nightmare day by day, soon learned that Atwood had slipped through the cracks before. Atwood was currently on parole after serving 3 years of a 5-year sentence after a child molestation charge involving a 7-year-old boy was plea bargained down to abduction. The enraged citizens of Tucson marched in the streets behind Vicki's family to protest lenient laws against convicted child molesters. Most wore yellow ribbons to show their faith in Vicki's safe return. Atwood fought extradition from Texas to Arizona. With no evidence that Vicki had been taken across state lines, the FBI dropped its federal charges against Frank Atwood. But state charges of kidnapping still held. In November, more than a month since Vicki's disappearance, Atwood returned to Arizona under heavy guard to stand trial for kidnapping. Bail was denied.
And I remember the day that they says, oh, you know, it will take probably at least 6 months. And I'm thinking, 6 months? Get out of here. You're crazy. Little did we know it was going to take almost 3 years.
On December 3rd, 1984, a clean-shaven Frank Jarvis Atwood Jr. pled not guilty at his arraignment. Due to publicity, the judge ordered Atwood's trial to be moved from Tucson to Phoenix. Jury selection would prove long and arduous, taking almost 6 weeks. But the case continued to unfold. On April 12, 1985, a woman walking her dog just off the main road found a small human skull in the desert northwest of Tucson.
We immediately cordoned off the area. The FBI was called in to assist. We systematically worked the area. What had happened was that the body had been scattered. The animals had actually gotten to it and had moved a number of parts around, and we just took our time. I think we were out there for 5 days collecting everything that we could possibly get out of that area.
About 100 people meticulously scoured a 20-square-mile stretch of desert. Investigators photographed the entire area to record the condition of the location. Forensic technicians marked areas where evidence was to be collected. In a case with so little physical evidence, overlooking the smallest bone fragment might prove costly. 12 hours a day for 5 days, authorities recovered and recorded bone fragments, their location, and their condition. Over 20 bags of evidence were delivered to the lab for identification in late May of 1985. including a portion of lower mandible that still held teeth. A witness came forward who testified to seeing Atwood arrive in the area with a child, then leave alone. The coroner found that weathering on the bones was consistent with 8 months' exposure to the elements. Dental records proved these were the remains of Vicki Lynn Hoskinson.
You know, they found the lower mandible and a gopher hole. 1 year later, one of the search and rescue people that searched for her remains had taken a bouquet of flowers and put it in that gopher hole where she found the lower mandible. Vicki Lynn affected a lot of people. These are people who never knew her as the vibrant tomboy little girl that we had. And I don't think anyone who lived here during that time will ever forget how this community came together because of her.
Vicki's family laid her to rest on May 30th, 1985. "500 mourners attended her funeral. The community was outraged that the life of one of its youngest members was cut so short. Debbie Carlson vowed that her daughter's death would have significance for the living.
I became very politically active to help fight for children's issues. And we got a couple laws changed in the state of Arizona. And I think that was my saving grace because it gave me some focus. It gave me a focus away from the pain and the gut wrench and the tearing at my heart that I felt every second to I was doing something positive for Vicki and for other kids. That my daughter was not going to die in vain. She was going to make a difference.
Frank Atwood was indicted for first-degree murder. On March 26, 1987, 2.5 years after Vicki disappeared, he was found guilty. Frank Atwood was sentenced to death. But a case like this is never truly over. 16 years later, memories of hope and despair still linger.
I'll never forget the sound of a helicopter. To this day, when I hear a helicopter, I remember those days. I remember the smell of the air, the time of the year, and the noise of a helicopter.